What's up, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayaking podcast. Really fun episode this week. I think you're going to enjoy. But just before we get started, a few housekeeping things. I want to say a big shout out thank you to people who support this podcast on Patreon. Patreon is a crowdfunding platform where you can chip in a couple of bucks every month and you get early access to the podcast, so before it comes on general release. I've also started doing some Patreon-only interactions through there in terms of direction of the podcast, who I talk to, what I talk to them about, so you get a little bit more input over what's happening in the podcast that way. Not to say that it's like I'm only doing that, but you get a little bit more of a direction from time to time. So that's an interesting way to interact. If you want to support through Patreon, just find me at patreon.com/Seth Ashworth. All right, that's all I've got for housekeeping. Enjoy this episode. Peace. Welcome back to Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayaking podcast. This week, I'm talking with industry insider and adventurous lady Shannon Finch, who's the brand manager at Kokatat water sports wear, water sports apparel, whatever they're meant to be called now. Kokatat whitewater kayaking gear, which I've been using forever. So Shannon, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Seth. Good to be here.
I am really excited to talk to you about kind of your role at Kokatat and how you're involved in like design things, and especially with that recent 5 decades range celebrating Kokatat's 50-year birthday. But before we get into that, I think I want to talk a little bit more about Shannon Finch, because you've got some interesting stuff going on outside of your input at Kokatat. And could you give everyone a little bit of a run through about who you are, where you're from, what you're about?
Oh, sure. Let's see. I'm from Utah. I grew up here and still live here for the majority of the year. And I got involved with Kokatat about 6 or 7 years ago. I'm a whitewater kayak instructor, and I was teaching for Otter Bar Kayak School in Northern California, and actually met some of the folks at Kokatat while there. So kind of slowly got involved by doing some graphic design with them there. But yeah, I've got a big passion in whitewater kayak instruction and just running rivers. And then likewise, I do a lot of skiing. So I actually work full time as well, doing as a backcountry ski guide here in Utah during the winter months. So I feel pretty fortunate that Kokatat, sees my passion in all those things and allows me to chase those dreams while working for them as well. So, yeah.
And pursuant to what you just said about skiing, you also work doing some kind of ski rescue with a dog. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I've got an Avalanche dog named Leaf, and he's an English Shepherd. And we worked at the ski resort, a local ski resort here, for 8 years together. And we've since left, but we still work together in the backcountry. And he's a certified Avalanche Rescue Dog, and it's just been a
What does that mean?
Yeah. So Leaf is trained to find someone buried in the snow. And so as a team, we can be deployed on an avalanche, likely one that occurs with the victim not having a beacon to be found. That's their best bet of being found. But if a dog's put on scene, we will go out, and he uses his nose, and I just kind of set him up for success using the winds, and we can search a site, and he can recover somebody pretty quickly. It's pretty remarkable what these dogs can do. So it's been quite a journey working with him, and just understanding what dogs are able to do as far as rescue scenes go. So, and likewise, he just gets to be my best little bud. I've gotten to have a really cool trust and friendship with my dog in a way that I've never experienced before, being able to work with him on the mountain. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is pretty neat. I think having a working dog, like in the, a lot of, I think in the current modern age, like there's not really many like proper working dogs, outside of like a small handful of people maybe hold dogs in that working dog niche. So it must be pretty interesting to raise a dog that's also like a proper working dog still.
Yeah, definitely. It's been quite the experience, and I've loved it for sure.
All right, so let's circle back around here. So you used to teach kayaking at Otter Bar, and you're kayaking quite frequently. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is middle salmon. 100 miles of wilderness self-support.
Oh yeah, that's a great river. Have you been out there?
I haven't been out there. I'm cruising. I've been cruising on your Instagram a bit lately, and I was reminded of a picture that was on there that I think Watershed shared maybe last year, where you're like it's like an overlay view with like all the things you're gonna have in your kayak for 100-mile trip, and I'm like, 100 miles is quite a lot of kayaking, and
It
this doesn't look like enough snacks to me.
is. I was totally accused of like, there's no way all that stuff fit in your boat, and I think I got kind of creative, but I might have stuffed some of that stuff in other people's boats too. But I don't know. Honestly, that's a pretty special trip to me. The middle part of the salmon.
Let's take it back for people who don't know where that is, or even what region of America that's in. Can you give us a breakdown?
Absolutely. So it's kind of in the central Idaho, kind of north central Idaho. It's a remarkable river. It comes out near from the headwaters are in the Sawtooth Mountain Range in Idaho, and it's a permitted river, so it's part of the Four Rivers Lottery. So it is quite difficult to get a permit, especially during prime season. Actually, when I was in high school, I was a junior in high school, and I was on a trip with my family, a self-support rafting trip, and I was sitting in the raft with my dad, and we had just scouted this rapid called Pistol Creek, which is kind of one of the crux style rapids of the run. And my mom was crying, and we were wet, and we was like, why are we here? I mean, we're an adventurous family, but I think we might have been in a little over our heads on this trip.
It sounds like it.
But I mean, we were fine. My mom is the best. But anyhow, so I'm in a raft with my dad, and he navigated down through the rapid, and we're looking back up at the rapid, and I see two kayakers come down, and they were just like dancing their way down this treacherous rapid in my mind. And I'm like, what? I want to do that. So I told my dad, I'm like, next time I come on this river, I'm going to be doing that. And he was like, I have no doubt you will. So, and I did. I didn't learn to kayak until I was in college. But I went, and I guess the Middle Fork of the Salmon is a deeper question for me. It really is where I fell in love with the river. And anyhow, so I learned to kayak, and it was probably 3 or 4 years later that my family had another permit on that section of water, and I paddled my own little Dagger Kingpin 6.2 or whatever kayak it was, and I just didn't really look back from there. I just kind of stuck to the kayaking, and yeah, I've been able to do the Middle Fork probably a dozen times, a mixture of raft support and then self-support kayaking, both in high water and low water. That trip that you were referencing from last fall was a low water trip, which is really fun because you can take really anyone down the river we had inflatable kayaks with us, we had hard shells, and everyone's getting that self-support experience and feeling adventurous and feeling challenged, but also it's really manageable, kind of a class 3 vibe at the lower water, but you still get hot springs, and I don't know, 100 miles of just floating down the river and packing on your stuff in your own little boat is, I don't know, it's just that it's some kind of adventure. I think I just love it.
There is something very satisfying about like you starting at the start with everything you have and then going for days at a time, and just being dependent on the things that you have with you, and then getting to the end and being like, oh, I didn't really need anything except what I had. And I don't know exactly how to qualify that feeling where you're just like, I don't need anything except what I have, but it's very freeing given that like a lot of the day to day, you need to have a lot of things to like survive, or like you need help, and when you're on those little small nuggets of time, it's just like, I don't need anything else. And it's so great.
It really is. And it's like I said, it doesn't have to be radical. It doesn't have to be like extreme difficulty. It's difficult enough just to be packing your own stuff and relying on you and your team. And I don't know, it's pretty special. So yeah, the Middle Fork has a special spot in my heart for sure, whether it's those high water self-support or the low water ones with friends that have never ever done anything like it. So yeah.
100 miles self-support inflatable kayak trip that's quite the like welcome to whitewater experience.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So yeah, it's been really fun to share that with other people, and yeah, just continue playing on that river. It's pretty great.
What's your like number one go-to meal for overnight trips? Like, how many nights are you out there for 100 days? That's like, or sorry, 100 miles. You're out there for like 4 days, 5 days?
Yeah, if it's lower water, probably 6 days, 5 nights on the low water trips. And on the high water trips, we've done it as fast as 3 days and 2 nights, you know? So, but my favorite, I don't know, I kind of get carried away with my food. I like to challenge myself. I probably challenge my cooking more on trips like that than I do at home. But I just like to try to bring a lot of fresh produce and, you know, make up meals as I'm out there. It's a little ridiculous, but when I look around at my friends that are eating, you know, freeze-dried food, it's like usually whatever I come up with is, it seems a little more.
What do you think your most outlandish overnighter meal has been? Given that you are still carrying everything in your kayak, what do you think has been the meal that stood out to you as like, I can't believe I pulled this off. This is ridiculous.
This one will sound kind of dumb, but it's a pizza in a pot where you make your own dough, and then it's actually not that difficult, but yeah, just throw your dough in, and I've done dough with like Bisquick mix, and then just, you know, add your ingredients on top, cook it in the pot. You always burn the bottom of the pizza, but it's great. It's so good.
I can't imagine being on an overnight trip where someone was like, hey, I'm going to make a pizza tonight.
Oh, okay. So Seth, my very first self-support trip was the Selway River in northern Idaho. And I had never, ever paddled with weight in my boat or anything. And I had all my food, which was freeze-dried, but I was way in over my head. And there was this older guy on the trip that seemed to be kind of the trip leader of the group. And I was like, Al, what are you going to have for dinner tonight? And Al goes, pizza and salad. And I'm like, you're going to have pizza and salad? I'm like, I just brought like a can of beans. I don't know what I'm doing here. And I look over at him, and he busts open a bag of spinach and starts eating spinach out of the bag. And I'm like, well, that's not really salad. And then he opens up a Hot Pocket and shucks it on the open flame of the fire, just like shucks it into the fire. And I'm like, okay, pizza and salad, got it. There's a lot of ways to do food on a self-support trip. Yeah. So
anyway, I think that's one of the most interesting things about self-support paddling is seeing what other people have brought, or what other people's like when you're at the put-in, people are like, hey, what are you bringing? And I've been on overnight trips, and I was like, oh, I've got a whole cooked chicken. You're like, what? Like, yeah, I'm just going to paddle the whole day with this whole cooked chicken in my dry bag. I was like, that smells terrible. And they're like, yeah, but it's going to taste great in 6 hours. I was like, okay.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
You're not wrong. And sure enough, like at the time, I ate that cooked chicken and it tasted great. And I was like, oh, this is a really great idea. And it's just, I find that to be one of the like really fascinating things about overnighting, especially if you're like doing an overnight trip that's not super technically challenging. Like if it's that like fun class 3 really scenic vibe the whole time, you can really be focused on that like lifestyle camping aspect of your trip without being like terrified of all the kayaking you're doing.
I appreciate that. Yeah, 100%.
I think that's a big part of it too. And I think a lot of people are unwilling to do multi-day trips because they don't see it as that like fun adventure type deal. They're like, oh man, that looks like so much effort. And even some days I'm like, oh, I do not want to go on an overnight trip right now because that looks like a whole bunch of effort. And then when you think about it the other way, and it's like you've got a nice weather window and the kayaking you're gonna be fun, but not crazy. It's like, oh yeah, that's going to be a good time.
Oh yeah, it always is, and sometimes it's quite the chore and effort to get to the river and do all the packing and figure that all out and the logistics of shuttle and blah blah blah. But then once you're on the river and your whole little world is just in your little kayak, it's like, oh, this is perfect.
Yeah, once you've gotten over that like first 10 minutes of like, did I forget something really critical? Am I going to figure this out in 5 minutes? And once you get over that feeling of like, oh, I didn't forget anything super critical, then it's like, yeah, I find that very satisfying.
Yeah, I agree. And the way you just described that kind of river paddling and, just kind of really straightforward class fun is really what I enjoy the most anymore. And it's so fun to add the added element of the overnight experience. And it just adds something more to the, if the water's not as difficult, you're still having an adventure. And I think that's what I'm drawn to these days.
Yeah, I think
I don't like to be scared on the river anymore. So I find my own adventures in other ways.
Yeah, and I hope people who are into kayaking, but the same thing, they're just like, I don't really want to be scared anymore. They can find other avenues to like kind of push themselves in their overnight cooking skills and their like camp making skills, and it can really add to the experience of your river trip, even if you're not necessarily like paddling at your absolute peak.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's talk about 5 decades of Kokatat. So your role as brand manager, you're kind of involved in the design aspect as well. Is that correct?
That is correct in the sense of branding the pieces. I work with the design team only with kind of new color selections, but really primarily my role in design is branding the pieces. So anywhere that our logo exists is kind of my limited role on the design of the product.
All right, so let's talk about 5 Decades collection that got released recently, which is obviously celebrating 50 years of Kokatat. What was the start point for that? Like, how did you all sit around the table and say, we want to put something together? This is what I've come up with. Like, what was the nuts and bolts process of that?
Okay, sure. We had just released a limited edition the year prior, if you recall, with the Centurion piece that we collaborated with actually a friend of mine, a local artist, Marcus Klein, and that was a huge success. He just crushed that. And so it was like, well, do we do another limited edition? And in my opinion, I feel like limited editions don't need to happen every year, but can happen when it's time to celebrate something, or it should be limited. It should be it shouldn't happen all the time, in my personal opinion. And so it came back around in a marketing meeting, which was shortly after the launch of the last LE, to say, should we do something next year? And I'm like, well, we have to. It's 50 years. So in my opinion, it's the year to do it. So during that meeting, I was kind of tasked with developing what that's going to look like. And likewise, the sales director suggested that this be a bigger, like a collection versus a singular piece. And so that's kind of what I was handed. It was like, this is kind of your task. Why don't you come up with some ideas and let's go from there. So looking at our 50 years is kind of where I started, what our history story is. And actually Kokatat's history is pretty cool. Our founder, Steve O'Meara, founded the company back in 1971. He was working in a shop called Arcata Transit Authority that he had in Arcata, and he started making like bivy sacks in the back room, and he branded them under the name Blue Puma. So Blue Puma is making these bivy sacks for camping.
I can't imagine why that didn't catch on.
I know. And so he was having some success, and actually Puma Shoes came after him and was like, you can't use our name. So he got a cease and desist from Puma Shoes to not use Blue Puma as a name. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess we're doing something. So he changed the name to Kokatat. And so as you know, in the Northern California region of California, there's still a really, there's quite a large indigenous people in the area. A lot of like the Yurok and the Kayak tribes are still in that area. And so Kokatat's a derivative of their language, and it means into the water. So I think his his pivot over to that name is actually pretty awesome considering. But he was actually, during that same time and the change of his name and direction of his company, he was approached by Don Banducci, who is the founder of Yakima Racks. He was in the area, and Rob Lesser and John Wasson and Lars Holbeck, they were kind of the pioneers of big water kayaking, with like first descents of the Stikine and the Alsek, and Rob Lesser's influence and first descents on the North Fork of the Payette. I mean, these were just like guys way before their time, but they were paddling in like wool sweaters, you know? And so they were going up to try to tackle some of these rivers in Canada, and approached Steve and said, can you like redesign these rain jackets to have some sort of element to keep water out? So Steve's first pieces in the whitewater world were these splash jackets that kind of had extended neoprene on the wrists and the neck, and he said, yeah, here you go. And so they went and they went into these rivers with that kind of gear, and from there it was just, Steve just didn't turn back. But in talking to him about this history story and how he kind of pivoted, he just said, you know, if it hadn't been for those early trips up into the Stikine and the Alsek with those expedition kayakers, he doesn't think that he would have transitioned to be in the paddle sports industry. So it's pretty cool, you know, kind of grassroots style to his start. And so looking at that whole piece, I'm like, okay, well, we've got a pretty great story here as far as, you know, our roots in this whitewater world. So how can we tie that all together and really celebrate this collection? So I knew we had a new dry top that we were going to be launching, and it didn't have a name yet. And sometimes I get to participate in the naming of products as well. And I pitched that we named the new dry top the Ohm, to pay tribute to Steve O'Meara as our founder. And that name somehow won. And so I was like, well, the Ohm has to be a part of the collection. So we had the Ohm ready to go, and then we had just done the LE on the Centurion PFD last year, and we had also released our Hustler PFD. So I thought, well, the Hustler is the obvious choice in my opinion to do something. So I felt like, okay, we're getting a collection, which was my task. Like, we've got the Ohm and the Hustler, very whitewater focused, which takes us back to the roots of our beginnings with this whole story. So that was all kind of coming together in my mind and on my storyboards, trying to pitch this idea. But then I ended up in Germany at a paddle sport expo show, and I kind of kept walking by the Duerstone booth. And the reason was because of your influence with Duerstone, Dane, Caleb, everything that you guys have kind of put out into the world regarding this little brand from the UK. I'm like, I want to meet them. But I was kind of like, I don't know, intimidated or something. When I'd walk by their booth, I was like, man, I want to go talk to those guys. I just want to tell them their shorts look cool, and I want to know more about their program, and I want to know more about, you know, who they are. And so anyhow, I finally ended up meeting them and talking to Rory and Stu and drinking coffee with them, and they're just the coolest guys. And so I was learning a lot about their shorts. And while at the show, I realized that the life short that they have is, you know, 100% recycled water bottles and recycled polyester. And it was just like, oh my gosh, you've got this wonderful short that just is incredible. And I was feeling a little bit like we needed something like that in our line. We needed we needed to update our short. And so anyway, as my brain was working through this, I'm like, how would it be if we could have Duerstone do a short for us? And so I pitched that to my boss, and he was like, wow, I like it, because it kind of ties the whole collection together. So he gave me the go ahead to just kind of pitch that idea to Rory and Stu and the boys over there. And I think you know them, but they were kind of taken aback by the idea.
Yeah, they are like the nicest guys ever. And Rory texted me like probably right after he saw you and was like, Dude, you'll never guess what just happened to me.
It was so funny. I think his words were, wow, that's completely disruptive and completely unexpected. I love it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
awesome, because I love it too. And it has, I mean, that part of the story, I mean, that just has so many facets, because it's like, okay, here's this 50-year-old company celebrating what we're doing, but we can also celebrate and collaborate with this younger company that's really doing amazing things, not only in creating great products, but pushing the envelope in the sustainability side of things. Which
yeah, I've been trying to get Rory on the program he's such a hard guy to pin down, but yeah, they're doing so many things I want to talk to him about, because they're like 1% for the planet, so they donate a lot of their profits for like environmental charities. They planted a ton of trees in the last 2 years. Yeah, the life shorts are like almost completely recycled. They're doing so much great stuff, and I can't wait to get Rory on to talk about it, to be honest.
You have to get him on here, because he's got such a great story and just is such an incredible person. And so seeing that, when I met him, I'm like, I think I was enamored for sure by the products and by their personality and who is Doerstone, and everything I learned of them as I met him. I'm like, these guys are incredible. But then to learn their sustainability story, like you were just speaking about, it's like, how did you guys get this much better? And so when I kind of circled back around with my boss about this, I kind of honed in mostly on the sustainability side of who they are, because Kokatat's always had a really good push for a sustainability pledge within our company, which has been awesome. We have a massive solar array, in fact, the largest in Humboldt, that runs our factory. We've helped Gore, actually, with this new Gore-Tex that they're coming out. They've been working on about 10 years to develop a less toxic laminate and any of the chemicals that they've used. And this new product that's coming out this year is very much part of that sustainability story as well. Like they're making big pushes to be more sustainable themselves. And so it's just kind of cool. It just all felt like we're coming together. Kokatat's always been focused on making products that last, therefore, reducing waste, and also our service department, right? Like you can just keep your products alive. So, I mean, when I started to look into the sustainability side of this story, I'm like, oh my gosh, like we can learn from Rory and his team at Doerstone. We can continue to push our own efforts into being more sustainable. And one of the things that we do, and a lot of companies do, and we're trying to get away from it, is using the plastic bags that we put some of our garments in as we ship them out to the retails. And but with the Doerstone short collab, we're not putting those in plastic. So we've developed like a hemp tie-up system for that short, which has really been cool, because it's just like, oh, you know what? This gives us an opportunity to really refocus our efforts in even those small ways, right? Where we're trying to get on an even better program and an even more sustainable project for the planet. So I guess I can get rambling, but I just think that the sustainable side of what Doerstone does and who they are was such a strong, like, okay, this is awesome. And it just felt like it really tied the whole story together, because it gave us an opportunity in our 50th year to kind of repledge our efforts on being a sustainable company. And then through this collaboration with them on the shorts, it's just very exciting. So with the design, I love everything that they do. So I kind of just handed it off to them as far as the short. And I said, what do you think? And they pitched a handful of ideas, some kind of conservative, some a little more radical. And in my mind, I wanted this collection to be very simple. I love last year's limited edition, but it was quite complex, which was great, but I just didn't want to repeat, right? So I thought, okay, let's go a little more simple. And so they developed the idea for the 5 waves, for one wave for each decade. And I was just like, oh, I love it. So that logo became kind of our commemorative logo for the collection. And so we put that on the Ohm dry top on the waistband very, very subtly. And then it's on the back of the Hustler in a more bold color, and obviously on the shorts. One other fun element of the Hustler PFD, it's got the big 5 Decades logo on the back, but when you open up the pocket, it actually has a little blue puma logo. So it's got the original Kokatat logo, and it's just subtle. It's just hidden in there.
Cool. That's a cool head nod that I think a lot of people won't pick up on unless they've listened to this podcast.
Absolutely. And it's not something that we we didn't tout like, oh, and check out the pocket, there's this little tiny blue puma. It was just like, no, let's just slip them in there, and people that know will know, and they can kind of tell that story and just kind of go right back to the beginnings of who Kokatat is and what Steve O'Meara did and what he's done for the industry. And it's pretty cool. I think it's kind of been a fun collection to tie it all together. And I'm super excited about it. Just really psyched about it.
That's having little head nods like that. Like, I didn't even know about that. That's really, really cool. And I think it's really important that if you're a company like Kokatat that's really big in the kayaking space and has been big for such a long time and has done so much, it's good to like head nod those people who helped get it started, and that's a really cool a cool thing about having like a 50-year collection or whatever.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been pretty fun, and I think Steve O is pretty excited about it, and I never really talked to him about his thoughts on having the new dry top named after him, but I'm sure that he was pretty excited about that as well. So
yeah, I'm sure he's okay with it.
It is important. It's the whitewater and the water world is such an interesting place. You describe it to people that don't understand it, and the family aspect of just being on the water with people, and it's all very tight knit. It's a very small world when you start to get yourself into the whitewater community. And I've never felt more welcomed. And, like you said, I've been fortunate to be able to do a lot of different things, and there's so many great people in the different outdoor industries, but the whitewater industry specifically is just so unique in the way that you can just you just feel at home so quickly with people that you don't know.
Yeah, I described it to someone a couple of weeks ago, actually, like to a non-kayaker friend, and I was trying to get to the root of like what it is that gets that feeling. And I don't know if I'm 100% settled on this yet. I'm still thinking about it, but the conclusion I came to was like when you're involved in an activity where your life completely is dependent not just on your actions, but on someone else being there to help you out, you develop those friendships really tight, really fast. And yeah, I don't know if there's any other sport that's exactly like that, where you're kind of individual, but you're definitely not individual, where you're really dependent on the other people. But I think that's why you build those bonds so quickly. It's because you're making choices that don't just impact you, and that can get pretty serious pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely something I'm going to be thinking about a little bit more. I'm going to try and circle back to in a future podcast, I think. Shannon, this has been really great. I really enjoyed shooting the breeze about this. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we round it off?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so. I really appreciate what you're doing. Your podcasts are so great. All the conversations and truly the questions I would have never thought to ask some of these guys and girls. It's been awesome to listen to, and just keep doing it. And thanks for letting me be kind of a small part of your program. I feel super honored, in fact.
Shannon, people can find you on the Instagram. How can they do that?
Oh, they've got to go to Shiznittle.
Shiznittle. Yeah, I actually highly recommend following this one if you don't already, person listening out there, because Shannon is doing a lot of interesting adventures I actually always enjoy keeping up with. So highly recommend. Are you anywhere else other than the gram?
No, I am not. That's my program. Yep.
Oh, and are you making gloves right now? You want to tell people about that?
I am. I'm making some. I make mittens and hats and like those funky little snowboard hoods that Burton and Dekine have been making for years. And I I don't know. I've got a little 11-year-old neighbor that I just love, and she saw my sewing machine at the house one day. And I don't sew much. I got trained to sew throw bags for Kokatat for events. And she said, "Let's learn to sew something." I'm like, I don't know what we would sew. And I had one of those Burton, the snowboard hoods. I had a Burton hood on my kitchen counter, and she said, "Let's learn how to make one of those." So that's what we did in December, and then it became a company. I don't know.
Well, that's pretty cool. So if you're looking for some little knitted or whatever they're called, fleece, hoods. I don't know how you describe those things.
I don't either. Hoods, mittens, hats. If you need something, come on over.
Yeah. Okay. Great. That's all I've got for this week. Thanks for listening to Question You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayaking Podcast. We'll see you in a future episode. Peace.